You're watching Inside Story on Al Jazeera America. I'm Ray Suarez. The Al Jazeera Monmouth University poll found that the lower you went in household income, the more likely a poll respondent was to say that the economic recovery hadn't yet touched their families. The president roughed out some proposals for wage earners and families in the middle of the wage tables last night. How would they work? Would they bring the kind of relief intended? Harry Stein, if you give a subsidy of whatever kind to a couple paying for child care, do you get some of that money back in increased economic activity?
You absolutely do. You know, what we've seen, this is one of the things that we've talked about in our middle class squeeze analysis, is that one of the things that keeps people out of the workforce, they can't afford child care for their kids. And so it makes more sense for them, for the second earner, to stay home with the kids instead of to go into the workforce. And when you make child care affordable, and a much larger tax credit for families that are paying thousands of dollars for child care does that, that enables those families to go get a job, stay in the workforce, and have their kids in a quality setting. And that increases the overall supply of labor and boosts the economy both in the short and in the long term.
Hadley Heath Manning, wouldn't families welcome that kind of relief?
I'm sure some families would. You know, the choice of what to do with a child when both parents want to go back to work, or in a single parent home where there is only one breadwinner in the household, is a difficult choice. And most families, when you ask them what would they like to do for their child, most families respond that they would like to have one of the spouses or a close family member care for their child. So, you know, some families make a choice, an intentional choice, to stay at home with their children during the young years of childhood. I realize that's a costly choice for many families, but in some instances this goes beyond the world of economics into the values that people have and the choices that they want to make about parenting. So one of the problems with tax credits and tax subsidies for various behaviors is that although this may not be the intention, they do favor some choices that some families make over the choices that other families make.
But we do know that the older your kids get, the more likely the woman is going to be back in the workforce. Isn't that the case?
That may be true, but at a certain age, your child is entering school and the demand for child care services is less. There are after-school programs and other types of child care services. The child care services that we're discussing in terms of, you know, where a young child might be is often during those years when a parent might stay at home. Not necessarily the mother, but in many cases, yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would just say that I think our goal ought to be that every family ought to make the decision that makes the most sense for them and what they want to do. And, you know, you've got a lot of families where somebody may want to go back into the workforce, but they can't really afford to do that because they can't afford child care. So this enables them to make that choice. Now, if they want to instead choose to stay home and care for their child, that's great, and they ought to have that choice as well. And it's also why, you know, just looking beyond the tax code, we need to make sure that we're raising wages broadly, so it's possible, at least, for a single breadwinner. And the president talked about a lot of policies to do that. Not all of them on the tax side. I know we're focused specifically on the tax policies, but we want to make sure that families can make whatever choice is best for them.
Pete Sepp, some of this is made to feel mysterious, and I worry a little bit because I hope that there is a more reliable way of knowing when you give somebody a $500 tax credit, which they can use toward college tuition, that we can calculate the payback for that. We're foregoing a certain amount of revenue. Federal government saying, okay, we're not going to collect that in taxes. You go and get 4 credits and another 4 the semester after that, and eventually, theoretically, you earn more money, pay more federal income tax, maybe even higher property taxes, send kids off to school who are more likely to finish more years of school because you did, and so on. Do we know that there's a payback?
There are some studies that attempt to quantify this, and of course the further out you try to get to predict the fallout, good or bad, from tax policies, the thinner ice you're on. That's the problem, because you give somebody child care subsidies through the tax code at this point in time so they can go and complete a degree. You're really trying to predict 10, even 20 years down the line how much different their income is going to be. That's not always easy to trace back to a tax credit.
Maybe not for an individual, but don't we know Haven't there been calculations for years about lifetime earnings and lifetime earnings gaps between people with different kinds of credentials and that sort of thing?
Absolutely, yes. And of course, there are also good calculations on the effects of policies on investments, for example, the amount of revenue that will come into the government. You know, this is a thing that we always speak about when the president talks of tackling oil and gas. He says, let's take away what he calls loopholes. Well, got to remember that the energy revolution that he praised so much is generating huge revenues for governments at all levels right now. You have to take that into account if you're going to talk about changing policy there.
We'll be back with more Inside Story in just a moment. When we return, the politics of the president's proposals. When the president tells a joint session of Congress he wants low-income Americans to get a raise, whether or not he's right, is it a good look for the party that's running Capitol Hill to sit on its hands? Stay with us.